And I believe, yes, I am live, and it is just me tonight, and I'll explain why in just a moment. But hello, everybody! Welcome to the stream of Pear of Geeks. Just one pair this time, not two. My name is Jayson, and yeah, Becky unfortunately is a little bit ill tonight, so she is on the stream, but she's not here with me. So for those of you who are like, oh, why doesn't Jayson do any streams by himself? Well, here you go. Here I am. Even dressed appropriately and stuff. So, I've got a few nice topics lined up for you. I have also got a rather exciting looking beer. It's very rainbowy and it's a collaboration between two breweries because I'm a nerd and I like those. Also, I have got some news on Complus that I'm going to be talking about a little bit, just as an intro, and of course, various topics that you'll see in the description as well. I know that Russell is already here, so hello Russell. I'm going to be talking tonight about cyberpunk settings, something that's been kind of on my mind recently. We did an awesome corporation game yesterday, and yeah, cyberpunk is one of my favourite types of role-playing, so that's going to be talked about later. Also, bringing NPCs to life, how to make them more three-dimensional, have a bit of personality, that kind of thing. God, I'm already really, really hot. It must be the nerves doing it by myself. And also, how to incorporate big bads and not just have them, like, you know, burst in and be a generic, now I fight you, and that's kind of it. But yeah, and of course, what I'm going to do first is, because at the moment there's not much chat going on, so chat away, people. Obviously you've got, you know, questions, if you want to ask me any questions. Anything nerdy, doesn't have to be RPG. I am an open book. I do like things like heavy metal as well, and I could talk about that for hours, for example. But what I'm going to do first is, of course, thank our beloved, I'm going to say it properly, patrons. I know my fiance Becky says patrons or Patreon, but this time I get to say it properly and actually say patrons. These people essentially help fund the channel. They keep us motivated. They allow us to get better equipment like this awesome sound gear we got here, and these amazing webcams, and better streaming and things like that. And they are amazing people. Unfortunately, there's some weird noise outside. Unfortunately, I have not been able to meet you all in real life. Maybe one day I will. But for now, I will read off the most awesome people in the world, which I'll put back up on the wall in just a second. We have Russell Higgins, Jolly Mangina, Mark Threlfall, Ormber, Brandon Fishwick, Dave Pryor, AJ, Fuke Enterprises, who will probably turn up in a moment and say he's about to go to work, Nate Hansham, Phil, or Philip Bate, and Elizabeth Radical. So thank you so much, everybody who is currently a patron. If you would like to become a patron, obviously we've got our stream and so on, but also we have Complus, and our Patreon is essentially a significant part of helping us to do that. So if you want to join in on that and get involved, then just head on over to patreon.com/Pear of Geeks. I have not put that in the description, I've just realised, so I'm going to pretend that it's here on all magical and stuff. And I'm going to put that up, back up a little bit later. But I've just realised I can't sort of stop talking because that would cause dead air, and that's not very nice. So let's move straight on to Complus stuff, of course. Because, as I mentioned, we have some news from that, and of course with Patreon, you know, you can help us with that, and Complus is coming up. We are 4 weeks away, pretty much exactly. Yes, we are pretty much exactly. It's the 13th of October. 13th of October. In fact, it's 3 days, so the 12th to the 14th of October. In fact, hold on, let me just double check, because I'm starting to wonder if I've got that slightly wrong. Okay, it's the 11th to the 13th, so actually we are almost just under a few weeks away, which is a bit terrifying. But yes, it's a 3-day convention this year, and essentially we are running our telethon just like last year, our 24-hour telethon on the Saturday, which is the 12th, and then on the Friday and the Sunday you can play in games, you can have your own games, host them, and just to reiterate with that, you can sign up with an account. At the moment, you can't sign up and make a game or anything, but that is coming very, very soon. Feel free to put in the comments or the chat, like, are you thinking of running a game this year? Are you thinking of playing anything? What kind of games do you want to see? It's going to be a bit more, there's going to be more freedom in there in terms of where you host your game, whether you want to broadcast it or not. It's completely up to you. And of course, as we mentioned towards the start of the year, in terms of feedback that you've given us, we are not kind of tying your account to Facebook or YouTube. So even if you haven't got either of those types of accounts, doesn't matter. As long as you sign up and register on ComPlus, as in our actual website, complus.live, then you'll be able to create something. And again, you do not have to broadcast it at all. It would be lovely if you did, because then, of course, people can watch. But if you don't want to, fine. If you want to do it on Twitch, fine. If you want to do it on Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds, fine. If you want to do it in real life, you can do that as well. As long as you've got, like, if you need, like, webcams or whatever, if, people overseas are coming in, you'd have to sort that out yourself. But yeah, you can do it in real life, and it's not even just role-playing games you can do. If you want to play board games or card games as well, absolutely fine. Entirely up to you. Russell Higgins has finally come and joined us once again, so let me put my hammer down over there. 6 winning lottery ticket numbers. I work in a telephone team at work, and the amount of times people have said to me when I've said, is there anything else I can help with? They go, oh, can I have the winning lottery numbers? Oh dear. So yeah, I hear that a lot. I haven't tried this beer, by the way. I better do that. Keep my voice hydrated and stuff, since it is just me. That is a rather nice beer. I recommend it. So it is Vocation and Magic Rock Brewing, brewed in collaboration, and it's called Hang Loose Epic West Coast IPA. I got this in Tesco. This is not a product placement, by the way, or a sponsor. I just love beer. Random tangent, but for those of you, if you play Borderlands, apparently Beavertown, who are a big English brewery, they have done a collaboration with Borderlands 3 and of bringing out this awesome new beer in sort of Borderlands 3 style. So that's cool. Yeah, so where was I? Yes, ComPlus. So in terms of when you can sign up, it should hopefully be next week sometime. My adorable fiance, who's in the next room and also on the chat, is going to be working very hard at it this weekend, and I will be, giving her motivation and massages and anything she wants while she does it. So fingers crossed it will be done by sometime this week, and you'll be able to sign up for that. Other news, there's some more sponsors that have been secured and prizes are on the way. There are some rather wonderful ones as well. Obviously, we said already there are wonderful ones, but there are even more wonderful ones. So if you know people who think that they want to tune into the telethon, there's so many prizes now. There's over 200 prizes to give away. And these are not just like measly little one-page PDF things either that you can get for free. Anyway, no. These are awesome things. I won't tell you what they are just yet, but two sponsors in particular who've just confirmed their prizes are Talzorian Games, and I'm sure lots of you will know what kind of stuff they're starting to bring out, and also Heroic Maps have come back with a vengeance with their best prize ever, as in not just ComPlus but the whole of when it was BrigadeCon as well, because they've been with us for I think the whole duration of when this convention stuff started. This is the best prize they've done so far. Or should I say prizes? But anyway, the chat is going a bit mental, so let's have a quick look at that. So Russell is asking the question, what is your favourite memory from RPGing? That's interesting, because I have a few. I've got, for example, there's a few highlights I can think of from when I had a group up in sort of uni times that was really cool. It was quite different in that we played D&D 3.5, but we had lots of laughs with that. There were lots of in-jokes and things like we had this Dire Badger mini that I've now put in my Betrayal of House on the Hill board game set. Excuse me, but basically that just became an in-joke thing, and this one particular guy who was the drummer in my band, he is somebody who really likes druids. He'd never played D&D before, but he always played druids. Whenever he did it, and he looks kind of like a druid. He looks like a bit of a hippie because he's got this sort of beard and long hair and stuff like that. And he's Dutch. So yeah, he played these druids, and he'd always have a dire badger as a familiar, so that was pretty hilarious. Also, plenty of memories from running conventions, like for example, really exciting scenes with sort of really tense roles and things like that. There was things like the Cthulhu Masters last year. Some great memories in that. And in fact, when we met up with one of the players at Fighting Fantasy Fest a couple of weeks ago, she started talking about it again. And it's like, that's really humbling, because she was sort of saying how much she enjoyed it. So a bit of self-promotion here, but if you happen to be going to the UK Games Expo next year, I'm assuming I'm going to be doing something in the Masters, or I might run something. Who knows? But if you do fancy a game of Cthulhu, I will almost certainly be running some Cthulhu, and I'm more than happy to give you a good time with that. Most feared adversary. I don't know if you mean real or fictional. I'm assuming you mean fictional. That's a good question. I don't know about most feared, but I definitely have some favourites. For example, I'm reading his Dark Materials again because there's an awesome TV series coming out, HBO doing it in the US and BBC doing it over here. And Mrs. Coulter, the elusive and extremely charismatic Mrs. Coulter with her golden monkey. She's brilliant. Quite sort of different because of when these books came out. So it was, I believe, the turn of the 2000s, the first book came out. And, meanwhile you had like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, where it was very kind of good versus evil and very black and white. And his Dark Materials, to start with, is quite black and white. Like, it's established quite quickly that Mrs. Coulter is obviously the baddie, or the adversary. And it's kind of presented to you as the reader before even the main characters know. But then things get very, very grey, and there's all this stuff about religion and fighting God. Although it's not like... This is where I guess kind of controversial, but God becomes the enemy, except he's still... Like, I personally believe that God is fictional anyway because I'm an atheist, but in the context of the book, he is definitely fictional because he's within a fictional universe that's parallel to ours. But there was always controversy from religious people when it came out, way more so than Harry Potter, where it was all blasphemous and this, that, and the other, and it taught children terrible things and stuff. And it's just like, yeah, seriously. Favourite DM, apart from me? No, there's lots of DMs that I like. I feel like I need to say Becky. Although I will say Becky because she runs some fantastic stuff. Different style to me in a lot of ways. And in terms of her style, to me, is very unpredictable and unexpected. Not just because she tends to improvise some of her sessions. This is where I'm going to hear her laughing at some point, possibly, from the reaction. Who else? John Large from Red Dice Diaries. I like his stuff a lot. Also, Philip Bates. I've never played as a player in one of his games before. It's normally I'm a player with him or IDM for him. But he's running a campaign at the moment, which is D&D 5e. Quite sort of high fantasy, which is what we wanted anyway. It was general consensus of the group. But one thing that I really like, which I want to kind of pick off him, at some point, or I'm trying to pick up from him, is his settings are really quite vivid. There's a lot of kind of detail in there, and also I can't quite tell if he's improvising or not, but I mean, he's got like a map that we use, which is fine. But he's obviously put a lot of thought into this setting, and things kind of work together nicely. And I don't know, like I'm sure my settings come off that way as well, but his are really quite well thought out, which is nice. It's something that I can definitely work on for me personally. I missed out favourite rule system. Bloody hell. Okay, so favourite rule system. It's a tie between two, I think, and they're not perfect systems by any means, but my favourite rule systems are Call of Cthulhu 7th Edition, which is the basic role-playing rule system, if you will. So it uses percentile dice. You've got your attributes and your skills and various other things. And then also Corporation, which I'm sure I'll touch on later. I do like the setting and system for that. The rule system, I believe, is called not the brutal. Maybe it's called the brutal system, but it's called Brutal Games. But rather than percentile, it's 2d10, and you always roll with two skills kind of intertwined. So you might ask for a perception plus observation, I think is the one I can think of. Or you might do perception plus... I don't use perception a lot. Perception plus lying and acting, that kind of thing. So you've got your main sort of attributes, things like sort of strength. They're not called sort of strength, charisma and stuff like that, but it's similar things. And then you've got all your skills, and there's lots of them, and you're not going to be specialised in lots of them by any means, but there's plenty of stuff there. So as I said, for example, there's lying and acting, there's looking good, things like that if you want to be all kind of charismatic, or there's things like you've got your different skills for different types of guns or melee stuff that you wield. Oh, here's a good one, which I know for definite, this is definitely correct. I haven't played the system for a while, to be fair. Agility plus close combat for things like if you're using katanas and stuff like that. Or there's, I believe it's perception plus, say, light firearms. If you're aiming your weapon, you've got the skill of having to sort of aim with your eyes and then obviously shooting the bastard. Becky is saying, where am I this week? I have already said this, so maybe I don't know if that captured. That might explain why chat didn't come through for a bit. But for those of you who have just joined us, including Becky, by the sounds of it, Becky is not here. She is on chat, but she's not really well enough to sit with me and do this tonight. She's quite run down, got a bit of a cold. And also she's going to be working on Com Plus over the weekend. To which she's saying, play with my hair. Yes, I will definitely play with your hair. Russell, going back to Russell, are you a role player or more into the crunchy bits? Well, this is the thing. So kind of sticking with the rule sets for a minute. So I prefer being a role player, definitely. And that's definitely something that I've gone more and more down that spectrum over time. Whereas, as I said, I used to play 3.5, and that was the first rule system I had. So very crunchy. With things like Call of Cthulhu now, if I run it, or even things like D&D, I definitely sacrifice, sort of detail with... I was going to make up something catchy there, but I just couldn't think of anything. It's too hot in here. I put storytelling over the actual sort of... does this rule technically work, and things like that. And with something like Shadows of Estron, where the rules are so light already, I pretty much just got rid of the majority of them and focused on maybe one or two roles in the whole session with that. With Corporation, it is still quite crunchy. And there are some things in there that I do like in terms of it being crunchy. I've said this before, but it reminds me a lot of old Warhammer, which I am also a big fan of. So it's a bit weird in that I think for those two, I like the kind of crunchiness, and for Corporation, for example, maybe not so much Warhammer, but for Corporation, I don't know if it would work as well if it wasn't as crunchy. There are lots of rules in there about, say, attacking certain bits of the body. So again, like Warhammer, you roll certain dice, and if you make it, then yes, you can attack the bit you choose. But there's lots of rules for things like weapons. There's a lot of different weapons. I'm sort of looking over here at my books, but for example, in supplements like Machines of War, it's got all these sort of rules for different guns, and they're not difficult to learn. It's just that it would be quite difficult to memorize them. There aren't lots of rolling tables, so you don't kind of roll and then look at a table and things like that, kind of like in Warhammer. Excuse me. But even so, there's a lot of sort of little details. There's things like mashing damage, which I've not really seen in any other RPG before, which I like. Basically, if you hit somebody either in a certain place or with a certain weapon, one of the weapons I can think of, which is absolutely ridiculous, I believe is a gun that can shoot knives, or a chainsaw that can shoot something, bullets or something like that. But anyway, mashing damage is like damage carried forward in rounds. So not only do you get your initial damage on your target because you've hit them, but because there's obviously a lot of blood pouring out, or maybe you've cut somebody's arm off, or you've done a pretty bad stab wound, there's going to be damage that carries over. It's not just simply, oh, you've hit them, 4 damage, and then that's it. There's this nice sort of, the urgency is still there, which kind of actually works really nicely with the story and kind of keeps up the action in that way. But also it makes you more aware of, okay, yeah, they're going to be bleeding or wounded. Whereas I think maybe in 5e, sometimes me personally, it's like, okay, yeah, you do the damage and then you kind of see them as like, oh, they're fine. It's just they've got less health, which is a bit silly. But anyway, where is lovely and talented Becky, and why is she not here? Well, I've already answered that question twice, so I'm not going to do it again. As she says, it's only twice. James Breeden, hello! Nice to see you. Hi all, I hope everyone is doing well, blessings. Is the biggest RPG giveaway... Oh, is it the biggest RPG giveaway in history by chance? Yes, going back to Complus, it is. Last year, it was the biggest RPG giveaway in history when we ran Complus 1 last year in November. And we raised more money than we ever did before, but also we gave away most prizes. I think in the end it was about 165. Again, I will say, for those of you who just joined us, if you come to Complus 2 this year, from the 11th to the 13th, yes, that's right, the 11th to the 13th of October, so 4 weeks away from now, and you tune into our telethon on the Saturday, then you are almost guaranteed to win a prize, because there are over 200 prizes. It is insane. By the way, for those of you who have done the stream before, so last year, for example, we are changing when it starts. So we are streaming it this year from midday UTC to midday on Sunday, rather than midnight to midnight. We will obviously let everybody know in sort of full capacity, but again, for those of you who've done it before, which I'm assuming a couple of you will have done, then you know, so put it in your diary. So if you're in the US, you're going to be waking up quite early, but then we did last year, so tables have turned a little bit. Hello, Michael B, nice to see you. It is just me tonight, unfortunately, because Becky's not very well, but never mind. So let's get on with the first topic, I suppose, since we are now out of chat. Also, I need to check the time, because I'm talking quite quickly. Again, I don't want to have dead air, so I'm just sort of talking. Okay, so, bringing NPCs to life. So, you know, I think we're all guilty of this. When we have NPCs in our game, maybe they're drawn up quite quickly, or they're put in for a singular purpose, so you think, right, I need an NPC to, in the most sort of bog standard circumstance, I need an NPC to give the PCs a mission or a plot hook or something like that. Or it can be something like a barkeep. In fact, I'll go with the barkeep because that's a good example. And again, I've done this as well. Basically, you know, when you've done your adventure, your players get to a tavern or a bar or whatever setting you want to be in. There's always a barkeep, of course there is, serving you drinks. And more often than not, that is all they do. They might have a bit of a personality about them, but apart from that, not much else. There's no kind of what's the word? There's no window into their background. Why have they got this bar? Or do they have anybody else working for them, maybe who's related to them? Or are they under hard times? Is something going on with the bar? Is it maybe just what would you call it? A shop front, as it were, for something a bit more sinister or secretive? There's lots of things you can do there. And, even putting in mundane stuff, is still fine. I'm a big fan, actually, of that kind of role-playing where you might have a scene, maybe just the PCs. I know I'm kind of on a tangent a little bit, but if the PCs want to just role-play for a bit, and there's not really much going on, I am absolutely fine with that. As long as the dynamic is still there, and as long as people are talking, then that's good. And of course, when it sort of gets to a point, you kind of gauge when you might then, bring something from outside in. But, the same can happen with if you're making up a background behind a NPC that, works in a bar. I had a sort of a good experience of that, actually, in one of John Larger's games, so Red Ice Diaries. He did a 5e setting, and if I remember rightly, the barkeep was either half orc or an orc, and he had a couple of people working for him. One of them was this rather sort of dopey lad. He did a really hilarious voice for him. Just like little things like that, so, the colleagues that worked for this guy, but also there were problems that were going on, so there were certain people that kept kind of coming in and harassing him for being an orc, a couple of sort of groups coming in that he didn't really want in, and of course there were rumours that were more kind of town-wide, but because he was the barkeep, that kind of fell on him a bit, because he had a business to run. So not only were kind of people trying to get information from him because they saw him as kind of like a worthy source of information where he might know a bit because of who he meets. But, also because of the type of town we were in, which was quite poor overall, his place was kind of fundamental to the working and economy of this town. So a lot rested on his shoulders, and that all came out. And sort of oozed into the roleplay, which is great. Other examples I can think of. Okay, how about if you've got like a shopkeeper is another one. If you're just going into a shop and you're buying some potions, something like that. In fact, another John Large example in the most recent game I played in his most recent of his games I played in was kind of like an OSR game, very old school, and there was a shopkeeper, and it seemed like it was going to be a fairly short exchange. We were looking for some sort of ingredient, but no, there was all this backstory in there, in that, actually this ingredient is quite rare, so therefore he wants something for it. What is that something he wants? And we kind of came to an agreement. I believe he wanted us to go and acquire something, so, already a side quest there. Even something quite sort of simple like that, rather than just being like, okay, yeah, that's 5 gold pieces, here you go, and then that's it. There's that sort of extra bit. But then also, the best bit I thought with that NPC was when everything went to shit and the kind of protection shield over our city dissolved because the wizard keeping it up died. he became quite important in terms of us being able to get out of the city and seek safety. Excuse me. So he became quite a significant character, not for a long time, but he was somebody who kind of came in more capacity with that, and that's where it kind of steps out of the role of the shopkeeper into, and that's actually a person. This is their livelihood, and now it's all gone. In a similar way with the PCs, we've lived here, and now that's all gone. So we could relate to each other with that. And whilst this shopkeeper, I think, came from a different place, he'd still had his shop there for a while. So, there's that kind of connection with NPCs. Another NPC example that I'm going to do, if you're, say, stuck, if you want to bring in a new NPC, say, maybe you want an encounter or something like that, but you want it to be memorable, again, backgrounds are a good thing to do, but maybe you see if the PCs have a background where you could bring somebody in. I've done that a few times, but in particular in A Clockwork Opera, it wasn't really planned per se up until the actual kind of session planning. I didn't really think of it, well in advance. But I thought, well, with Becky's character, Agnes, who kind of grew up on a farm, she hated it, she moved to the city, she became one of the... Oh God, I can't remember what the hell they're called now, but basically the... kind of like an SS person in the sort of ranks of the dictatorship. It wasn't the SS, because it was steampunk based, but equivalent. I thought, well, what about her parents? What do they think of this? Where are they? And the fact that they kind of escaped out of the city, and Agnes had just kind of become enlightened that actually the cause, the regime, was not what she thought it was. I thought, wouldn't this be a good time to pull at some heartstrings a bit and introduce a family member or somebody that she knows well? And that's what happened. And the thing is, I thought, well, I could just have the parents maybe at the farm. But that's a bit boring, because, what would they do? They might have a bit of a chat or something, but that's it. I thought, no. They're in an area, lots of desert, lots of potential activity going on. I had thought about, kind of like with something like Borderlands or Mad Max, I thought of, okay, there's going to be possibly people living out here in the wastes. Very different life, of course, to in the city. The reason why it was wasteland was because essentially the regime just cut down all the trees, and as what tends to happen, like with any desert or wasteland, rains, no sort of cover, so the ground gets infertile, etc., etc. And I thought, yeah, how about we have them, there be a family member in this group of Mad Max type bandits that we left the last session on, because I'd introduced the kind of the bandits and whatever as a kind of like a cliffhanger, and then afterwards I thought, oh yes, let's have the mother in there, and possibly even some other family members, and I put in a couple of I think 2 brothers, and that turned a really generic NPC encounter. It's like, yeah, there's some bandits in the desert. Yeah, quite sort of generic and a bit overused, to something really quite different. And then because I decided to put that in, along came all this stuff. Okay, well, what caused them to be there after, being on quite a, fertile farm, doing quite well for themselves? What happened? So I thought, okay, I need to answer that question. And then I thought, okay, well, the mother is the leader, so how does that work with her daughter, her eldest daughter, coming in? And I thought, ooh, that would be interesting, because in the end it means that I kind of made up this tradition where, oh, actually, the mother and the daughter have to fight each other because the daughter is the eldest and therefore potential heir to the leadership and whatever. Hello, Fuke! Welcome. Hopefully you've got a bit of time before you have to go to work, unless you've got a day off. If so, congrats. Would you like a cup of kindness with that, babe? Thank you. Yes, I would. Although I do have this beer, which is lovely. Yeah, I mean, NPCs, they... With me, anyway, what I found is, if I put a bit of thought into them, and kind of start asking questions around this NPC, this person, which is normally quite a generic mould. So, say, barkeep, or, I don't know, a bard in the street, or even, let's talk about enemy NPCs as well. Like, oh, it's an orc, oh, it's a goblin, no. You know, I think about where they are in this world of mine. So, okay, why have the PCs encountered this person or this creature in this environment? Is there a specific reason? Rather than just go with, oh, well, because the land kind of suits them. So, for example, oh, there's lots of forests, so therefore there's going to be a foresty creature. I think of it more than that. In fact, I quite like to not do it that way and think, okay, let's have an unusual NPC creature or whatever in a setting they wouldn't usually be in. And that makes it work nicely, because then it's like, okay, well, why are they there? That's a bit weird, isn't it? Another way of kind of incorporating that, things like if you want to do dungeons or tombs or something like that, if you want to incorporate enemy NPCs in there, I tend to do dungeons and things like that, kind of have a little bit of a history and then plonk the NPCs in based around that history. So maybe the dungeon used to be something, but now, because say these creatures or these monsters have come here, it now looks like this. Like, the NPCs have actually changed the environment around them. Or maybe the NPCs are just passing through, which means that there is a situation and an urgency that they're trying to aim for. So, say you encounter a bard in a forest. Okay, they must be travelling, right? Yeah, fair enough. But maybe there's something else to it. Maybe they are on the run. Maybe, okay, this is a bit odd because it's nighttime and they're in a forest. Why aren't they just on the road like, you know, normal people would? It's a bit dangerous, isn't it, going through a forest? Maybe they're trying to run away from something. Maybe they're hiding from something. Maybe they're trying to reach a place as quickly as possible to deliver a message. You know, all these little things that you could put in just by making where the NPCs are slightly disjointed is another way of bringing it to life. Fuke says, life's a bit sad for me these days. My RPG group, all of them are dead. I hope you mean as in the characters are dead rather than the actual players. That's a bit worrying. But I hope things get better for you. Maybe you'll start another RPG group, and hey, there are plenty online, of course, and of course Complus 2. You could do some games in Complus 2. That was a bit dark. But yeah, what else is there with NPCs? I know there are, of course, bad guys, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, I think going back to, you know, being guilty as somebody who kind of, you just sort of insert an NPC for filler a bit, to kind of just give a bit of information. It's like, you know, try and put them in the setting a bit more. Rather than just like, okay, yeah, this person says this to you. It's like, okay, well, how do they know that? Why are they in this place? You know, things like that. Oh, thank God. The games are dead, not the players or characters. Okay, good. I'm pleased to hear. I know you're in Canada rather than the US, but even so, you can never really quite tell at the minute. due to interesting times. Yeah, that is a bit of a shame. I remember when that happened to me a little while ago, and we kind of had to revive them a bit, and then now fortunately I do have a game every week, but it's online. So yeah, I'm sure you'll find something. Maybe you could, I don't know if you DM'd before, but you could DM or something like that. We'll see. Okay, so incorporating the big bads. Yes, so again, big bads can kind of come in a bit of a generic way. So of course you've got the final boss fight, if you will. And obviously that derives from video games, like really old video games, where you might know a bit about the boss either right at the very start. That was quite often the case, like for example with Castlevania or Super Mario, or it might be that it kind of unfolds right at the end, and then you fight that thing or whatever. But, you know, again, it's very generic, and you want to be able to give the big bad some really awesome traits, some really memorable traits. But also, even when you've done that, it's really quite easy to just have them come in a way that we've all seen before. So, I don't know, for example, they're like, let's take sci-fi for example, they're a big monster that rules over like a planet or something like that. It might be something that is a source of an infection that's going on, or you might have the captain or commander of an evil army type thing. So you kind of have a pretty predictable, right, okay, so they're at the top, so they're obviously the bad guy, and then we have to fight everybody in between in order to get. And I don't mean that always happens, of course, but it's sort of a progression that we all know and we all recognise and things like that. So how do we incorporate big bads a bit better? You know, how do we put them in differently? So sticking with the kind of evil head of an army thing for a minute. For example, my Clockwork Opera big bad. She, I mean, I'm more than happy to say she was quite a predictable big bad because she was the head of state. So you had some dealings with NPCs that were lower in rank and stuff, and this, that, and the other. They were kind of colleagues of Agnes, and they became sort of evil in the PC's eyes, and eventually they were killed. But of course there was the big bad. But I hardly ever spoke about her until things got really quite hairy for the PCs. So really the big bad was the smaller guy, who had a Finnish name for some reason. I just sort of put his name in there. He was like the kind of the head of the SS regime group that I came up with, and basically Agnes found him out to be doing devious, unlawful things, but then realised actually he's pretty horrible. So it was twofold in terms of why they decided to kill him. So once that was out of the way, and then everything went crazy and basically a full revolution happened, that was when the head of state presented herself. So even though, you know, it was possible the PCs knew that the final baddie or big bad was going to be the person who ruled over the dictatorship, you know, it was never fully established. I wanted to keep that area a bit murky, and again, she was hardly ever talked about or referenced. And then when she was introduced in, she didn't just kind of walk up to the PCs or even present herself physically. She announced herself on this huge tannoy, so she was just an ominous voice. And in the end, it turns out she was not even in the city at all. She had buggered off fairly promptly, and the PCs had to then find her. So that was, I thought, quite cool. So it was kind of taking something predictable and giving her a grand entrance because, yeah, she's the head of state, and the way her personality kind of worked, she was quite an extrovert, so she would want to make herself heard. Rather than just being, like, inaccessible, and then you kind of fight through, and then finally she's there. Whilst there was a bit of that, because the PCs had to kind of find her in a protected stronghold, she still toyed with the PCs and communicated with them, and because of that, I think it made it a bit more exciting, I think, because the PCs clocked on that obviously she was the big bad, and there was a lot of kind of moral stuff going around, especially with Agnes, so it was a lot of awesome role-playing going on. The other example that I did of the big bad was in my most recent Cthulhu campaign on Pear of Geeks 2, where the big bad technically was in the very first session. Not the, like, session 0 little encounter, but in the first session as the hurricane. But in terms of who the big bad actually was, even I didn't know who it was technically until possibly the final session, which is a bit different for me. But in the end I made it out. So, okay, there was this hurricane. There were two factions that were fighting each other that were potentially as bad as each other. One were these cultists of the Mygo, which are these aliens that live on Pluto, very kind of crustacean-y creatures. And then there was also the, what are they called? The, basically the assassins who work for the Yellow King and stuff. Now, the Yellow King was kind of a character mentioned, so the PCs knew about him, but they did not know about his daughter, who was the one who was kind of pulling all the strings. And in the end, I thought, well, that actually works really well, because there was this female character, this female NPC, who became really quite important in kind of helping the PCs after she died. And then I thought, well, maybe that's not actually her at all. Maybe that's actually the Yellow King's daughter, you know, manifesting as her. And I thought, yeah, in the end, that actually works very well. And it makes sense for the daughter to be pulling the strings for the father, because the father there was all this sort of stuff going on with it. So yeah, it kind of all came out at the end, and all the loose strings were sort of tied together. So then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, you've got kind of the quite old school of, you know who the bad guy is right from the start, and that can work. I definitely find in kind of, say, superhero, I don't do superhero very often, but superhero games, post-apocalyptic kind of games, it works as well, very gritty. Things like Shadowrun and Cyberpunk, you may know who the bad guy is already, so it's already established. Now, when it's already established, it means that the PCs already have some sort of regard for this big bad, or even a relationship with this big bad, and that gives plenty of flavour for a backstory, especially with a relationship. So say the PCs and the big bad originally worked with each other, and now they don't, and they're sworn enemies. Okay, why is that? You know, you can make all that up. So there's lots of that going on. And of course, as we move into sort of cyberpunk and dystopian settings, in a lot of futuristic settings, there is, of course, oh god, I keep burping, sorry, this beer, this tendency where, you know, you are kind of underdogs or kind of renegades fighting the establishment and fuck the police type thing, and kind of like with my steampunk game, sort of. But sort of more kind of black and white. We're the good guys, they're the bad guys, but very dystopian. So you're fighting against a system that's taken over everything. Let's have a quick look at the chat. Summarising a favourite D&D NPC of mine is the drug-dealing, 5-piece suit-wearing lizard folk. I'm not sure how 5-piece suits work. But they always seem to walk past in the middle of the night. One of the dead games was the one I was DMing. Okay, I'm sorry to hear that. I suppose the issue with that is, you know, especially if you come up with a really cool story and then it kind of stops, it's never nice, and that's happened to me before, so it's not great. But yeah, I'm sure you'll find some new people to play with. For there are many of us around the world. But yes, I like the idea of a drug-dealing lizard. That's another thing as well about NPCs and big bads all together, in that they quite often tend to be human. I think because humans are more relatable because we are human. And I know that, again, going back to old school, back in the day, you know, you were fighting monsters like orcs and dragons that were bad and, you know, very, very black and white. I think people want to move away from that. But at the same time, and again, I am guilty of this, you know, I first think, okay, you know, by default they're human. And it's like, well, should they be, really? Because, again, it depends on location, it depends on culture, it depends on how they behave. And of course, humans are very diverse, and that's very much a thing in, for example, 5e. And then you've got, like, your stats that you reflect with that as well. And then in sci-fi as well, a lot of the time, and cyberpunk and dystopian stuff, a lot of the time people are just humans because it's kind of more modern and, you know, sort of just past the present day type thing. So if there are different species, because it's kind of based around the real world, it's like, okay, well, why? You've got to think of a lot more reasons as to why that race actually exists, as opposed to in a fantasy setting where it's like, yeah, there are dragonborn, yeah, there are elves, yeah, there are dwarves, etc., etc. And Becky says, as the world's foremost Queen Elizabeth I fanatic, I have to say this is a lovely cup of coffee. I think what Becky is hinting at is for me to talk about Queen Elizabeth I, who, yes, I remember she was a good big bad. She didn't last for very long, to be fair, but she was in for a good few sessions. What I liked was her motives were very different, even for something like Corporation, which is already crazy and insane. We never actually found out who she was, really. She could have been anybody. But basically, she was obsessed with Queen Elizabeth I. She would dress up like her all the time. And the only other thing we really knew about her was she ran Costa Coffee. And if you don't know what that is, it's one of the huge coffee chains in the UK. And Becky did a thing in terms of our corporation, because we are British, we have to sell tea, like really good quality tea. Whilst all these really crappy sort of coffee chains were just taking over the market. So we had Costa, we had Starbucks. I really even thought we were going to have Nero or Pret a Manger or something like that. But no, those are the main two. Costa we started off with. And yeah, it was interesting because she really, really tried to play the part of Queen Elizabeth I, which kind of set up her character already. But she was very kind of eccentric and obviously very, very, as I said, very obsessed. So she was really quite kind of like the Joker, maybe, in that way of being kind of a bit of a psychopath. Yes, she was indeed the CEO of Costa Coffee. But insisted on dressing like Elizabeth I, and I really don't know why. But that was just her thing. And there was also her I believe it was her sidekick who always dressed in white. I don't know if he was called Lucius or something similar, but oh god, what was he called? Felix says, no Canadian coffee chain of Tim Hortons. No, I did know Tim Hortons existed, but I forgot. I'm not that familiar with American or Canadian coffee chains, if I'm honest with you. Because we have our own over here. The only thing I can think of was, because Costa is English or British, and Queen Elizabeth I is obviously, or was, Queen of England. Maybe that's why? I don't know. But then another potential big bad was Queen Elizabeth II. Or rather, she was Princess Elizabeth II. She was kind of a... not quite a big bad, but could have been. She might as well have been. And another big bad in that campaign was Hitler. Who actually wasn't Hitler. He was somebody called Jayson, who was pretending to be Hitler. So it was just crazy. But yeah, there are things like that where, kind of breaking from the mold, you could tie your character to a single purpose, a single reason for living. Dressing up as Queen Elizabeth I and being a severely obsessed fanatic with Queen Elizabeth I could be one thing, whilst you have these motives of, say, they're the head of Costa Coffee, so they want to, you know, just spread their economic wing, or, you know, coffee wing far and wide, and make everybody drink Costa Coffee, which was basically her motive. I think something addictive was being put into the coffee, or, you know, it was very kind of dystopian, that the beans of a specific taste, and everybody wanted that taste. I wanted everybody to be drinking it, etc. So, yeah, if you think about movies as well, there are lots of characters, like big bads in movies, that have specific weird quirks about them. They have weird hobbies for seemingly no reason. And that's just a thing because, and you don't always have to explain why with a big bad. In fact, I actually prefer it a lot if you don't explain it, because there's that kind of disjointedness, and you just kind of learn to accept it, and you know, it's unpredictable, but you know, it kind of, it's something that you can kind of understand, but also you can't, because the first thing that probably comes into your head is, why the hell do they like Queen Elizabeth I so much? Why they dress that way? But then it just becomes a thing of, oh yeah, it's the CEO who dresses like Queen Elizabeth I. So Fuchs says, when is Con Plus? How does one sign up for some of the games? Largest online RPG giveaway, asking so I can give it a shout on my channel. Okay, so for Fuchs, and for anybody else who's just joined, I keep saying us, but actually it's just me. Excuse me. Con Plus 2 this year is on the 11th to the 13th of October, so 4 weeks away. The telethon is on the 12th, which is a Saturday, running from midday UTC to midday on the Sunday UTC. In the meantime, if you want to run/playing games, that's what the Friday, obviously the Saturday is for, and the Sunday, although we would hope you would join in for the telethon on the Saturday. But yeah, for those of you who are not free on the Saturday, you've got the Friday and the Sunday. As I mentioned earlier, RPG games, of course, and you don't have to broadcast them, you don't have to run them on a certain platform, you can do them on whatever you want, and you can even do them in real life if you really want to. It's kind of about bringing the community together. Or if you want to do board games, card games, something non-RPG, also great. We really don't mind, because the charity that we are raising money for also does that stuff. I mean, they also do LARPing, but I don't know how feasible it would be to broadcast a LARP. But also in terms of sign-ups and things like that, so you can currently register on our website, complus.live. You cannot sign up or submit games just yet, although hopefully, fingers crossed, you'll be able to do so by next week. When you sign up, either as a player or a GM, you do not have to have a Facebook account or a YouTube account. As long as you sign up on the website, you'll be able to create something or multiple things. And then, obviously, communicate that to your players in terms of, what kind of game you're running, things like that. And it's a lot more free in terms of what kind of games you want to run. And again, you do not have to broadcast either. So if you'd rather just play during the event, in the comfort of your own home, without any cameras or anything like that, all good. Or if you'd rather just do a private hangout, something like that, that is also fine. It does not matter to us at all, as long as you're having fun and as long as you're doing it as part of the con. You should definitely sign up, even if you don't actually join any games, which, why would you do that? But if you don't join any games, you should still sign up to actually get an account on the website. Reason being is because that is how you win prizes during the telethon. If you do not have an account on the website, you cannot win prizes. So definitely do that, if for no other reason at all. And again, there are over 200 prizes, and that is not an exaggeration or a rounding up. There are over 200. I have counted them. There are a lot. And they are all amazing prizes. We have small prizes, we have huge prizes, we have physical, we have PDF, we have subscriptions, we have miniatures, we have RPG books, we have accessories like dice and supplements and resources for DMs. So many different types of prizes this year. It is astounding. And we don't even have all the prizes confirmed yet. Most of them are, but we still have a few to do so yet. So there are some more, potentially, that are going to be coming. And we are also going to be updating the website with any kind of, updates to these prizes very soon. So hopefully you got all that, Vuk, and anybody else. But we are now going to move on to cyberpunk settings. And dystopia. I want to talk about dystopian as well. So earlier I mentioned about corporation. We recently did one of our car journey corporation games. For those of you who've never done any RPG in the car, by the way, Becky thought of this great idea. It's just one-on-one, so she normally runs them and I'm the character. So there's not much role-playing in there, of course, but it's still, fun to do. And the way we roll dice is we look at the number plate of the car that is passing us. Excuse me. And in terms of how an English number plate works, or a British number plate, you have basically 2 letters and 2 numbers followed by some other stuff. So we look at the second number, and 0 to 10 is what we need, or 0 to 9 rather. So 9 is damn good. If we get a double 6, that is a critical success, and if we get a double 5, that is a critical fail. We'll not be able to do that good of a shout out, but I will try. Well, hey, if you want, because this is a broadcast on YouTube and it will all be recorded, you could just kind of record or download that specific bit where I did the shout out and I could do it for you. If you want. Or you could just copy what I said. It doesn't matter. But anyway, so so if you've never done a car journey before when you're playing role-playing, I recommend it. It's great fun, and it definitely passes the time on long car journeys, that's for sure. Cyberpunk settings. So we got a corporation. That is our favourite in terms of any kind of... The way we think of cyberpunk, or the way I think of cyberpunk, is it is futuristic, but it's mainly set on Earth. It's not kind of space opera, it's not exploring different planets, it's not based on a ship, or kind of in a spaceship or anything like that. It's very much confined to Earth. That's how I differentiate anyway. I do like sci-fi. I love Star Wars, for one thing. I have a selection of Star Wars boxer shorts, for example. But apart from that, there's things like Alien as well. I love Alien. But I do prefer cyberpunk. The reason being, I think it, again, in this day and age, it is quite relatable. There are things going on in technology, for example, that are slowly advancing, and some of the things that we were speculating about, such as cybernetic arms and stuff like that, are slowly becoming a reality. There are people who are into transhumanism that want to potentially kind of expand out of their biological shell and things like that. There are things going on in science, like with like cloning and stem cell research, even things to do with like curing diseases and stuff, which are really getting into quite sort of almost futuristic territory, or what we deemed to be something, that will happen in the future. Obviously, there's no flying cars just yet. I don't know if there ever will be flying cars, but cyberpunk. With cyberpunk, it tends to be something that is maybe 1,000 years in the future, maybe 500 years in the future. In terms of corporation, that is actually less than 500 years now. It was, let's say, 2019. So it is 479 years in the future. A couple of people I know have said, actually, that's too early in the future for all this stuff to be implemented, to which, yeah, I sort of agree, but then again, the way things are going at the moment, the way the world is changing so quickly, maybe not, actually. The thing I love about corporation is the premise is quite different. It kind of goes away from this whole thing of you are some underdogs living in a gritty place, and you are, I don't know, part of a resistance, or you are a gang or something like that, and you're trying to fight the system or stay alive and kill police and stuff like that. I quite like that premise, and of course you've got Shadowrun where things like that happen, but I like how corporation comes out of that. So if you've never thought of corporation before, or you've never heard of it, you are agents. So you are agents that work for a corporation. So you are basically bad guys already, to a degree. Of course, when you play, you don't see yourself as bad. So there's this kind of, murkiness of morality and stuff. And maybe you see yourself as good because another corporation is worse than you and they're doing bad things and you want to stop that, or rather you're told that that's what you must do. But it really can depend. And even then, each corporation has a different kind of code, if you will, of why they do stuff, why their corporation exists. And there are 5 monolithic ones to choose from, so the big guys. There are smaller ones, and you're more than happy to make up like smaller ones and stuff. But you've got big ones, and already there are clashes with these corporations. You can play as a party of what's called cross-corporation, which I like doing for one-shots because you've all got different ideals and motives and stuff. Maybe not so much if you were doing a campaign, but even if you're playing a campaign and say you're all the same corporation, you face up to another corporation, you're all very different from each other, and you all have different reasons for why you're doing stuff, and you obviously think that what you're doing is the right thing. So one example is we've got Comoros, who they are very kind of non-technological in a lot of ways, and they focus a lot on psychic powers. So they don't like a lot of technology, so they therefore clash against, say, Eurasia Incorporated, who love all their big spas and fitness centres and offshore or off-planet theme parks and, things like that. Or what the hell are the American ones called? I can't quite remember, but anyway, the American corporation, who are all about massive guns and big weapons, of course, and stuff like that. But then you've got other things as well. Another clash, which is actually probably my favourite, is basically there's a Shiukiro, which are the Japanese and Southern Asia corporation, versus the more Chinese and the rest of the Far East corporation, which for the life of me I can't remember what the hell they're called. But I did that for one of my first games I ever ran for corporation, and they worked really well. Shiukiro are all about kind of tradition and upholding tradition. They do a lot of stuff with katanas. They're very precise and specific, and they deal with things like computers. So a lot of hacking stuff and splicing. You get a lot of characters that do stuff in that. And then you've got the Chinese corporation, which deal a lot with kind of what sort of how to word it, like it's big tech but kind of big industry tech. So things like war machines or stuff to put on ships, things like that. And they hate each other. They absolutely hate each other. Kind of like, you know, China and Japan have always had kind of clashes over history, so there's that playing into it. But yeah, so that's one of my favourites. Becky says, because 55 and 66 are quite common with UK number plates. Indeed they are. Obviously, if you are in a different country, you'd have to think of something else, but, you know, lots of options available. Fiuk says, why not Shadowrun? Well, to be honest, I've never actually played Shadowrun. I was put off by character creation and kind of the rule set in general a bit. I have played the video game of it. I can't remember exactly. Shadowrun Returns or something. But apart from that, it just seems kind of... yeah... generic, really. Basically, once I found out Corporation existed, that really pulled me in. And Becky says, Corporation feels like modern day to me in so many ways, which is why when I GM it, I make it ridiculous, because our real world is ridiculous. Yeah, I mean, as I was saying, the way things are going at the moment, with how things in history are repeating itself, things like politics, war, global warming, stuff like that. The way things are going, I mean, James Norbury has kind of predicted quite a lot of things. But I could honestly see things like just corporations taking over everything. You know, capitalism is huge. There are people out there like Jeff Bezos with so much money. And obviously he's not going to give it to any of us poor souls. So, you know, it's if you play it too truthfully, yeah, it is quite similar to today's world, which I can see why, you know, why you play it with such a ridiculous premise out there. It kind of maybe detaches it a bit from today's world. Excuse me. Sorry, I keep sniffing. One of my nostrils is blocked. Fuke says, you have a drink tonight? Yes, I do. So, it is a collaboration with Vocation and Magic Rock Brewing. It's a nice sort of sunflower tie-dye design. It's called Hang Loose Epic West Coast IPA. It's 7% ABV, which is why I'm drinking it slowly, but again, I'm talking a lot. And yeah, it's a nice beer. Definitely tastes quite strong, but nice and fruity. If you're interested, the malts are Extra Pale and Cara, and the hops are Cascade, Centennial, Chinook, and Citra. So a lovely blend, a lovely mix of hops in there. Not everybody, of course, will like this type of drink. I get that. I'm a massive beer snob, but for Tesco, this is a good find. So yeah, I'm pleased with it. You cut your nose shaving, Fiuk. That's I'm not entirely sure how you would do that unless you have a lot of a tash or something. I don't know. Wow. Hopefully hopefully it's not too bad. I quite often cut myself on my neck, but I've never cut myself on my nose before. But also you need better blades, I think. Yes. Other things I like about Corporation, as well as the fact that you are already kind of on the other side. There's not this black and white, you're good, playing versus evil or anything. As I just mentioned, it's like things are kind of playing out in quite a real way. So there are bits of the world that are uninhabitable. Like France has become a wasteland, and of course that's a bit tongue-in-cheek because James Norbury's British. The British stereotypically hate the French, which is a bit weird because we've always been allied with them in war, but we also hate them because I suppose they're our neighbours. It's quite possible in 500 years that a lot of the Earth will be wasteland. Of course, because of global warming. But then we might also create the technology to stop it or push it back, or we might create artificial structures where we can still inhabit, things like that. Fiuk was paying more attention to me talking about Corporation than shaving, so it's their fault. Okay, fair enough. Well, that's a good enough excuse. Hopefully you've got a plaster or something you can put on, and that is a good explanation to your boss as well if you're late. I was going to say, what time is it over there? It must be sort of like, getting on to the afternoon there. Yeah, the 100-Year War, France versus Britain. I don't know much about the 100 Years' War. That was a big gap in my history knowledge. I did do a lot of history at school, but basically primary school was all the cool ancient history like the Egyptians and stuff. And then at secondary school, it was all Hitler, with a bit of Mussolini and Mao and Peron and Stalin, kind of put in there. But yeah, so, there are things like that are happening. There are some cool little things as well, which you get on the world map incorporation. Like cool little features about the Earth and what's happened and what technology we've made, sort of on a worldwide scale. So we have things like sky bridges, where they're basically these huge bridges that go, for example, from somewhere in Scotland, I believe, to somewhere in Canada or possibly New England. I don't know off the top of my head, but basically ginormous bridges that are thousands of feet up in the air, where you drive. You don't. I can't remember if you can drive across specifically, but there are certain transport shuttles you use to go across them. There are certain teleportation type devices as well that you can use, and we've had a few scenes of those in Corporation where we're actually at those ports. And we've had to try and get in without kind of passes and things like that, which is quite cool. So, it's obviously very futuristic. It's like, obviously we can't teleport things at the moment. And obviously we don't have bridges thousands of feet up in the air. But at the same time, we're kind of close with teleportation and things like that. So, in 500 years' time, again, I'm sure we'll have things like that. So the 100-Year War was 1420. Yeah, I don't know anything about the 1400s, 1300s, anything like that. We moved straight from the Battle of Hastings to Tudor. So gap. Absolute gap in the middle. What else is different about cyberpunk settings? To avoid sort of the establishment and things. I suppose talking about a more kind of general thing. So we've been watching a Netflix series called Colony recently, which actually I recommend. It's pretty good. It's got quite a generic premise in that there's San Francisco and it's a colony. Okay, we don't really know why it's a colony, but it's like a walled area. There is some kind of very fascist Nazi style regime going on. Even the flags look similar, deliberately so. Food, there are huge food shortages, especially certain foods like coffee are just unheard of. It starts off, so quite generic. It's like people are living in poverty and in fear, and they have to adhere to this big, regime, and you're not really sure why. And then it gets better than that. The other thing I don't like is there's lots of Hollywood sex. So you get sort of sex that lasts for 2 minutes and it's angry afterwards, or the man is wounded and then has sex with the woman and stuff like that. But apart from that, there are things in it which do make it a bit different. There's, for example, the arrival, which you learn very slowly about as you go through the series. There are basically aliens that came down on the arrival and started blowing shit up. They took over Earth, essentially, by the sounds of it. Although it is still a bit muddy in terms of, okay, did they take over the whole thing? Did they choose certain bits, etc., etc.? And you never actually see the scene of the arrival until Season 2. So, it's only really mentioned a little bit. But the thing that I liked about it the most, which made it a bit different, is the main character, who's the dashing hero, the head of the family. He started off as somebody trying to do something illegal, breaking the law, and then he's caught, and then in order to actually keep on living, he is made to take a job with the regime. And then, sort of spoilers, but they happen quite quickly, or they found it quite quickly, you then find out that his wife is in the Resistance, which, as you can probably tell, is a cell of, anarchist-type figures who want to bring the regime down. So already you've got this big clash of thought ideals going on. Okay, so Becky says, the 15th century is fascinating. GM should learn about it. There are private landowner battles. Yeah, see, we don't know about this stuff because it's not taught in schools, and it should be. And the kitty is meowing. I feel bad about the kitty meowing. I kind of want to let her in. In fact, let's see. Oh, actually, no, Becky's going to get her, I think. She's meowing because she's wondering where we are and stuff. Anyway, sorry, I digressed a moment there. So, yeah, it's taking quite a bog standard premise of, okay, so, there's people who are obviously living in fear, they're in poverty, they've not got much food, kind of run down, regime above their heads, all this stuff. Okay, well, then there's this whole thing of, okay, there's the good person working for the bad people, there's the wife working for the good people, but are they? There's lots of bad things about them and stuff. Becky's cuddling cat on the loo, as you do. And I won't say much about it because that kind of goes into spoilers, but there's some nice little nuances. So, for example, how the humans with power are kind of treated by the aliens, or how they have to talk to them and kind of make deals with them and stuff. And it's not as simple as you'd think, and there's lots of kind of, the stuff in there going on. So yeah, I enjoy it. Becky enjoys it. It's one of those shows where if you watch one, you kind of have to watch another one. But there we go. Fiuk says, played the in-book adventure of Etherscope. It's steampunk, cyberpunk, alternate history, due to ether being found. The intro adventure takes place in the great metropolis, aka Liverpool plus Manchester. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so that person knows their geography, so I imagine, yes, eventually Liverpool will probably merge in with Manchester, because they are fairly close together. There's the one interesting Shadowrun game I can think of, which the Gentleman Gamer did a rant about, where the GM decides to set the Shadowrun setting in Birmingham, out of all places, which is a bit weird, because Birmingham is not really a cyberpunk setting. You know, you've got your London metropolis, London and Manchester, Liverpool and Manchester I can see, yeah, as Manchester in particular is really quite a modern northern metropolis now. But also James Norbury, he does Glasgow as one, which is interesting. I've never run a game in Glasgow, but that would be actually quite funny. I can see that being quite funny. Possibly lots of Iron Brew involved, which if you don't know what that is, look it up, but it's basically a soft drink that's very orange and sugary, and it's very Scottish. Becky says Colony is good sci-fi dystopian material for GMs. Fairly close together. Yeah. Oh right, I've just realised the two different things. Yeah. So the thing about Colony is it's mostly dystopian, especially to start with, but there is this sort of sci-fi element that slowly unfolds. One of the first things you see is there's this kind of big... It almost looks like a firework, but it's basically a ship taking off, and you just see it as a spectacle, and all the characters are like, oh my god, it's time, they're about to do it, and then it happens, and that's really all you know. I was like, okay. And there are things like drones, which are these little things, a bit like... what are they called? Like manhacks, I think they're called in Half-Life 2. Where they're little flying things that go around and shoot you and stuff like that if you're in the wrong place, the wrong time type thing. Oh, I beg your pardon. So apparently Fuke was talking to Becky when he was asking about drinks. So yeah, Becky is indeed drinking dance juice, which is done by the London Brewing Company, I think. It was quite nice. Glasgow as a setting, the PCs would get battered. Hey, they would. But, you know, Glasgow has its history as well. I don't know much about Glasgow, to be fair, but it has its history. So, you know, that'd be quite interesting having a futuristic Glasgow. But Birmingham, I don't know. It's very kind of... Oh... I'm in Birmingham. I'm Brummie. That is an actual Brummie accent to a degree. Not everybody sounds like that, but that is. This is kind of the Brummie accent, you know, talking like this. Yes, Becky, indeed. Everything in Glasgow is deep fried in batter, including Mars bars. Not Iron Brew though. That's as it is, but Mars bars. Sausages, haggis, I suppose. Fuke is saying something unrelated. Is the Isle of Man Celtic? Yes, it is Celtic. So whenever England play in the Six Nations rugby, I do not support them. I support Ireland because they are the closest in terms of, you know, being Celtic. And all that, and any kind of Celtic thing kind of tends to get my nationalism going here. I don't really consider myself English, even though I'm actually mostly English. I consider myself a Celt, because I am a Celt. I was born on soil where Romans never roamed, and things like that. Becky says they're Vikings, hence he's blonde, with the back spots to prove it. Seriously? It's acne. I'm going through a second puberty. Jeez. Yes, I am blonde. Yes, I have a Viking sort of complexion, I know. But I don't know how much of my family is derived from being Viking and Scandinavian or anything like that. Some of it is Irish. A bit of it is Welsh. I know some of my distant ancestors were actually French. Fun fact, my on my dad's side, his ancestors were French aristocrats in the French Revolution that escaped to Cambridge and changed their name to a more Englishified name. So there's that. So I'm a traitor to the French crown. Hi, Scott. You probably just tuned in when I was talking about acne. It was Becky, not me, who brought that up, I must say. Felix says, how would and what Celtic stuff would you bring to Corporation? Interesting. See, the thing is, being Celtic is obviously a very old historic thing because, you know, nowadays you don't consider yourself really to be Celtic. You know, there was the Celts, the Saxons, etc., etc. The Romans, the Gauls, all that stuff. However, it's kind of been modernised in sport, so you get a lot of Celtic teams in sports. So, I don't know. That's an interesting premise. Maybe it could be a corporation. So I don't know, they've got a 4-leaf clover or something, and they call themselves something Celtic, but actually they are very modern. Or maybe it's a type of technology, or even a consumable of some description. Like you've got smork, which is a little post we've got on here, which, is essentially a type of pork, artificial pork, called smork because it's in the form of a smoothie. And you've got egg you like, which is a flavoured egg, so it could be vanilla flavour or apple flavoured or strawberry, and you eat that for breakfast normally, so that's another thing you can have. So yeah, interesting. I'm not really sure. I think maybe there could be a corporation in Glasgow, which is a Scottish corporation that could definitely be Celtic in some way or another. But no, it would be kind of like a clash between ancient and modern. The only other thing I could think of was, say, somewhere really remote like the Faroe Islands could potentially be untouched by corporations. So maybe there's a Splinter Cell there or something. And they've kind of reverted back to the old ways. So they're quite primitive in the way they do things. I don't know. Although going back to the Queen Elizabeth thing, maybe you could have, say, somebody... It's not that direct, but you could have somebody step up and say, actually, I am descended from Mary, Queen of Scots, or I am descended from David Jacobite, something like that, and therefore I'm going to take over England and stuff, and therefore Eurasia Incorporated. One thing as well, the premise of corporation is because there are 5 monolithic corporations, politicians and monarchs do not rule the world anymore. So maybe that could be a thing. Maybe it could be people trying to stomp down these corporations in order to bring back monarchies, bring back republics, or democracies and stuff like that. So maybe that could be a premise as well with some Celtic stuff in there. Yeah. I suppose that's all I can think of. But yeah, and ask some more questions, because my throat's starting to get sore and I'm starting to run out of ideas. But yeah, okay, so more dystopian and stuff like that. So, okay, you've got your technology. Okay, right, actually, no. You know what? We haven't really talked about technology or weapons yet. So, and like cybernetics and things. That's one thing that separates the present, of course, from the future, is cybernetics specifically modified into humans. So in the game yesterday, I had essentially a bionic eye. I was able to identify metals within things, like if they were hidden or kind of what type of metals they are, that kind of thing. To a degree, it wasn't X-ray vision or anything. And you've got things like that in Deus Ex, where the character can kind of see through stuff a little bit, analyse stuff. You've got heads-up display and things. You've got things like with bionic arms, and again, Deus Ex, he has a bionic arm. It could be a case of, okay, why have you chosen to get rid of a biological arm to get a bionic arm? Well, maybe it's because it has supreme strength or dexterity. In Ghost in the Shell, there are robots that have, of course, bionic arms because they are robots, but their fingers split into about 5 different little nodes each in order to type quicker, which I thought was a great idea. I really do like Ghost in the Shell. It's a really interesting setting because, yes, it's cyberpunk, but I think it's more in the future than possibly Corporation or something like that. There's a lot more technology in there, and I think that's another thing as well, in that how much technology do you want in your game? Is it something where, okay, obviously politics, global warming, the future of the world, they've kind of moved on a bit? Is it just that, or is it a case of actually we've discovered this, we've cured cancer, we have made this teleportation thing, we have flown to Proxima Centauri type thing? So there's a lot of kind of capacity and leeway of how far really do you want to go into the future. I suppose, yeah, talking about implementing technology and kind of putting that into your world then. So is it just sort of domestic things? Are there a few domestic things that are put in there that kind of enhance everyday living? Or is it a case of you have supreme technological warfare, so your military stuff is maybe more upped? One other thing I've thought of for inspiration is Detroit Become Human, which I know is another video game, but I get inspiration from video games. So essentially, if you've not played it, it is made by a rather over-the-top French Canadian called David Cage, who likes to create art. So take that what you will. Detroit Become Human, though, is pretty good. Very on the nose, though, I must say. But the premise is that there are AIs in the game that are kind of servants to humans. They might have a very domestic role in that they clean up the kitchen or something like that. Or they might be more involved in sort of, say, being a police detective, which is one of the characters you play. And you can do sort of things that humans can't do, but you also don't have any emotions as much and things like that. And basically, eventually, the AI start rising up against humans because the way they've been treated and yada yada yada. So it is fighting the system kind of thing. But in terms of technology, it's like, okay, have you got sort of enhanced, I don't know, Hoover, like vacuum cleaner type things like they used to advertise in the 50s, or have you got like a bit like, I mean, again, it's kind of happening already, but things like Siri and the Amazon stick, you can just say, Siri, do this, and it will do it. You've got like electronic thermostats for your bath that you can control on your phone and stuff. So have you got something a bit more futuristic than that are just kind of conveniences to people? Excuse me. Or is it just government run? Is it military run? Excuse me, think about that a bit. Think about how much technology is accessible to people as well. It might be that you've got a cyberpunk world where actually for the bog standard working person, they can't get any technology at all. It's too expensive. Maybe it's illegal. Kind of like in my steampunk game where magic was illegal, except for a few sort of chosen ones in the regime who could use bits of it, and even then it was a small amount of magic they could use. So, is it illegal? Is it something that's bootlegged or traded off in the black market, that kind of thing. Then, of course, you've got, okay, who rules the roost? Is it still a politician? Is it something else? Is it AI? Have AI taken over? Have you got robots or something? Or, you know, there's things like that you can look at. And also, I think Cyberpunk needs to kind of have a bit of a dark setting to it. Gritty, noir. I love cyberpunk settings in particular, where you've got these cities that are cities within cities. They're built on layers, and I've noticed in a few different, like completely different cyberpunk settings. I can't say cyberpunk tonight. I don't know why. Cyberpunk. That they're inspired a bit by kind of Chinese and Asian culture, where things are so tightly packed together because there's just so many people now. It's becoming unsustainable, so you have these really confined tiny rooms all built on top of each other type thing. Little tiny flats and stuff. You know, there's things like, you know, rules and regulations. Where can your characters access? Where can they not? If they're, say, you know, fairly regular citizens. Again, another video game, but a good one, was the Dreamfall series, where you've got a fantasy setting, but also you've got a kind of a cyberpunk dystopian setting, where it wasn't like really AI, but the technology was obviously there. So the metropolises were sort of spilling out lots of layers. Do not be afraid to use more elevation when you're building cities and stuff in cyberpunk settings. Get away from the ground, move up. Even if there's no flying cars or anything, you know, where are humans going to go? They have to kind of go up a bit in order to actually be within that city or whatever. But yeah, there's the actual world. I can't remember how far in the future it is. It's known as Arcadia, to the fantasy setting, if you will. But yeah, it's got more technology. You can access more stuff, kind of like the internet, but it's like a data server type thing. You've got your kind of your bar scenes where there's sort of neon lights and music and stuff and all that kind of shady stuff. You've got your kind of, one thing in particular with Cyberpunk, you quite often have a much bigger police presence in there. So whether it's like an armoured policeman with, you know, a big gun type thing, or you've got, I don't know, little vehicles going around checking stuff, or going back to Colony, you've got your drones going around. Actually, there's two things mainly in Colony. There's the drones and there's the red hats, which are basically the armoured police, which are these people wearing red berets. They're mostly covered up, so they've got like a little scarf thing there, and then they've got a massive gun. But they are called out, so you don't really see them on the street that much. But yeah, it's definitely more of a police presence, as it were. Things like curfews as well you could do. Again, Colony has a curfew. There's this really deafening siren that goes off. I think it's like, is it midnight or something? Which is quite lenient, to be fair. There's another game which was called Getting Up, which is also a bit dystopian, where you're a graffiti artist, and again, it's fuck the police and fighting the system, but there is a curfew. And again, bigger police presence, and with this police presence comes more armoured vehicles, more weapons, more kind of armoured gear type things, so Oh my god, finally Ronnie appears. Okay, so we're a little bit... Actually, there's two things behind. Excuse me, my throat's getting a bit sore. Babe, if you're watching this still, would you mind getting me a glass of water, please? Fuchs says, are you saying I should play Deus Ex? Where do I find history of the Isle of Man that is accurate? That implies there's a lot of history out there that's not accurate. Okay, so Deus Ex is a pretty good game. I haven't completed it, but yeah, it was good. It's kind of like... because it's IDOS. If you've ever played the Thief series, it's like that. But obviously cyberpunk, or kind of in that area and stuff. So yeah, it's a good game. History of the Iron Man is accurate. Basically, read a book or go on to any sort of Isle of Man based website. Although bear in mind, the Manx aren't just the Celts. There's lots of different regions that are Celtic. You've got the Irish, of course, the Scottish, Cornish, a few other places, Shetland Islands. The Celts were pretty badass back in the day, before the Romans came along and ransacked most of them. And yeah, Ronnie is late to the party. Yes, you are indeed late to the party. Hi Jayson, Dark and Gritty can contain so many genres, from dystopian sci-fi to horror and even fantasy. Yeah, it can do. As I've mentioned, you can have dystopian stuff in fantasy settings, definitely. And in fact, that's kind of how my Clockwork Opera premise came about, in that I thought, okay, it's not steampunk as steampunk is known, because steampunk is quite utopian. You've got a lot of, oh, look at these amazing airships and this amazing technology and steam we have, and we can do so many things now. No, it was fantasy, but because of this very fascist dictatorship that wanted to do things its own way, it brought about technology instead of magic. It was a huge statement against magic. There was this big war that went on, so it was much darker in that way. Fuchs says yes, and he knows bits about Irish, Scottish and Breton Celts, but nothing about the Isle of Man. Well, the Isle of Man is more similar to Irish than Scottish, or Welsh. Oh god, I forgot Wales in terms of the Celts. Oh Jesus. Hopefully there's no Welsh people watching. Apart from Becky, who's part Welsh, sort of. Yeah, we've got our own history, lots of legends, lots of folklore in there. We're a very small island. We've got various, stories and stuff there. So do a bit of Googling. There's lots of books and stuff. Nice to see you're interested in my country. That's nice. Ryan says, I agree, steampunk tends to be outward and forward looking rather than dystopian, although it can run dark but not usual. Indeed. And you were in the Clockwork Saga, which was the second series, as it were. Thank God. Thank you very much. Just give me a minute. I won't go on for too much longer. I'll go on for another 10 minutes-ish, I think. Because we've been going for about 2 hours. Oh, God, that helps. I could just feel my throat getting so dry. But anyway, so Becca says we should make a video on the Isle of Man at some point. Yes, we should. It's a very pretty place. Felix is kind of why, like, Ethoscope is cyberpunk with steampunk elements. Yeah. I mean, with Clockwork Opera, I didn't make it cyberpunk per se. Excuse me, I made it a very dystopian premise, but I made sure to keep it all within the confines of fantasy and the restriction of magic with steampunk. Of course, you've got things like dieselpunk. You've got post-apocalyptic as well, which is different. I think, for example, post-apocalyptic, the difference between that and cyberpunk is post-apocalyptic is where things have all gone completely wrong. It's all about survival now. There are no rules. Whereas in cyberpunk, civilization still exists. There's technology available. Whether it's available to everybody, however, is a different story. And it's kind of more, society is still established as it is sort of now. Whereas with post-apocalyptic stuff, you might, get people in corpse paint style makeup, chained to a massive vehicle, playing an electric guitar, as you do. Is Goodman Games from the UK? Oh, that's a good point. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm willing to look, if you will give me a minute. Goodman Games. Let's have a look. I think they are, actually. Online store. Your source for adventures. In fact, let's see if there's a contact us. Problem is I haven't got my keyboard over here, so if I have to type anything, I go... Oh yeah, of course, there's Dungeon Crawl Classics and stuff. So I think the answer is yes. I can't see it. Contact us. Hold on a second. Oh, no, Goodman or American. Okay, fine. So no, they are American. In fact, yes, I do remember now. Dungeon Crawl Classics is definitely American as opposed to UK. Or rather, US space as opposed to UK. Right, so where was I up to? Other things with cyberpunk stuff you could think about. Even just in terms of the lives of regular people within your game are of course really quite different. They're really quite they can be very unique depending on who they work for, where they live, how well off they are. I think it creates a lot more of a potential divide or detachment compared to, say, fantasy, where, okay, you might have poor people versus your kings and queens and stuff like that, but kind of in the middle, it's sort of more kind of up like that. Whereas I think really with cyberpunk, again, kind of like it's getting at the moment, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. So, you know, you've got your fantasy kings and queens that might have a lot of money, but say compared to, you know, the scale now, it could potentially be, you know, we're talking in the billions and trillions as opposed to the thousands, you know, hundreds of thousands. Ryan says, I find it interesting in terms of genre flavour that players are happy to play in a dystopian setting, but not so much in an egalitarian setting. I know what system you're thinking of, Mr. Blue Rose. I think it's because it creates conflict and tension. And whilst there was conflict and tension in Blue Rose, I think if you don't know the setting and if you don't know the system, you're not maybe gonna be interested in it. Whereas if you think, right, there's a setting here that is cyberpunk or it's dystopian, then obviously there's going to be divides and clashes between, you know, different factions of people and stuff. Hell, there's that many friggin' clashes and divides between the UK at the moment, right now, that will probably never be healed for generations to come. But, you know, I think, yeah, there's that kind of a more initial, you kind of know that that's going to be the case, therefore it might potentially be more appealing and maybe more exciting. And Blue Rose is exciting, of course, but again, if you don't know what Blue Rose is, then you're not necessarily going to want to play it. Whereas if you say, oh, there's this system, say, okay, it's corporation, oh, I've never heard of that, which lots of people say, oh, so what kind of setting is it? Oh, it's cyberpunk, it's set 500 years in the future, corporations taking over the world. Oh, okay, yeah, that sounds interesting, because people immediately think, right, corporations taking over the world, it's cyberpunk, therefore, there's technology, there is clashes of conflict, you will have, you know, people trying to break the law, you know, stuff like that. Fuke says, thanks, Pear of Geeks, both in chat and doing the video, for being awesome. We'll do a shout for Complus and sign up for it in the next week. I'm off to work, sorry for being weird. Listening for the next 7 minutes. That is fine. We appreciate you being weird, because if you were normal, you'd be boring, like the rest of us. So thank you so much for chat, Fuke. I hope that your shift goes okay today. And again, best of luck to getting a new group sorted. And thank you very much, of course, for doing a shout out for us. And for being a Patreon. of course. But anyway, yeah, so just kind of wrapping up then, I suppose. So, yeah, with cyberpunk is a big umbrella in terms of, you know, how futuristic do you want it? How much technology do you want? What kind of ruling force is there in the game? Scott says, take a normie under your wing. Well, yeah, you're an exception, Scott, that's fine. But other normal people, no. We are geeks, after all. We're the weirdos. Yeah, so, you know, as you know, I love Corporation. It's got quite a specific, well-established type of cyberpunk setting. You could go earlier than that, so say maybe a few years in the future where things are only slowly getting to shit and maybe global warming has caused the sea levels to rise a bit, so maybe there's sort of worse weather and stuff. Or you might go all out and go, okay, it is several thousand years in the future. I just suddenly thought of the South Park mini-series of Go God Go, where it involved several thousand years in the future. It was very futuristic. It wasn't cyberpunk per se, but it sort of was, because there were three main factions and they were all atheists, but they were fighting over which of them had the answer to the great question, basically. Which is rather hilarious. And one of them happened to be otters. You know, so things like that. Yeah, and you might have some kind of sci-fi space opera stuff in there. So you might have aliens, you might have different races in there, or you might not. You might just, again, confine everything to Earth and confine everything to just humans. But even if you do, you could have a clone that went wrong. You could have, you know, an evolution of something. Maybe some sort of lizard has actually evolved, or maybe it was a scientific experiment even that went wrong. A bit like with, in Spider-Man in particular, you get a lot of kind of experiments that have gone wrong, like the lizard and stuff like that, where it's like a superhuman lizard. But if you want a bit of off-world stuff, yeah, you could maybe have discoveries out to Mars, like the board game Terraforming Mars. You know, out to, as I mentioned, sort of Proxima Centauri, which, if you don't know what that is, it's basically the nearest main star to our solar system. So you might have a colony out there somewhere doing something. Yeah, all kinds of things. But I think the important thing about cyberpunk is that you still focus on Earth, as opposed to you going off exploring intrepidly, boldly going where no man has gone before. Doing that with arm gestures type thing. Make it gritty. Even if your characters are very high up, very rich, whatever, give the premise some grittiness. Maybe they encounter something that makes them think twice about who they are, you know, all these things like that. Anyway, my throat is getting very sore, so I am going to stop talking in a couple of minutes, but in the meantime I am going to thank once again the most awesome people in the world who help us basically keep this channel going, and also help with Com Plus in terms of funding. So thank you very much to Russell Higgins, Joey Mangina, Mark Threlfall, Ormba, Brandon Fishwick, Dave Poirier, AJ, Fuke Enterprises, who has just left the stream, Nate Hanshin, Philip Bates, and Elizabeth Chiropractical. Again, if you want to get involved in this, just head on over to patreon.com/Pear of Geeks. I believe there is still the early bird option if you want to do a small amount. You know, even something really small like $2 can make a huge difference. Excuse me, to getting nice equipment, keeping us motivated, helping with the convention, etc., and postage and stuff, which is amazing. And of course, if you do become a Patreon, you will become one of the most awesome people in the world. Trademark. And you will be on this amazing poster that is on our back wall normally. I'm not going to say what that is. And yeah, so thank you very much to everyone else who was in the chat. I learned that it was Proxima Centauri. Maybe it's called Alpha Centauri now. I don't know. But anyway, so thank you everyone for joining me tonight. Again, apologies that Becky couldn't make it. Hopefully she'll be better for next week. With Com Plus, again, fingers crossed, you should be able to sign up for games and create some next week when that system all launches. But in the meantime, feel free to sign up to make an account on complus.live. I hope as well that you enjoyed the chat tonight, that it was interesting. I will leave with one last thing from Fiuk, which says, there are days most where I don't feel any type of awesome person. Well, we think you are. And on that note, we will see you in the next stream. So, good night, everybody. Bye-bye.